All right, guys, welcome to another video. Today we're going to be doing our first ROK deep dive. Right, I'm going to actually cover gold heads, so investing in gold heads, investing in mass and blueprints, and then armaments, and then when is the best time to do each. Right, if you're trying to work on all three, when do you put one on the back burner? When do you prioritize something else? And then this is going to be assuming that you at least have like a basic understanding of this, right? Because one, I could talk a little bit quote unquote higher level. But also, if I was going to cover the basics of all of this video would be like 10 times as long and be very boring for a lot of people that already know what's going on. All right, so let's actually start out with gold heads. Okay, so gold heads, obviously, once the commander is unlocked, you need 690 to max them. The gold heads, let's actually start from the end first. Okay, so once you caught up, quote unquote, caught up on gold heads, right? So right now, for example, I have 493 gold heads. My Gajimata is at 5551. I can max him if I want, right? But I'm working on him through dailies. But once you caught up on a commander, so basically, for example, you have 800 gold heads and a new commander comes out, right? Shajar comes out and you invest in her, you insta-max her, and you spend 690 gold heads, right? By the time the next commander comes out after that, you should be able to accumulate enough gold heads again to invest in that commander without actually spending gems and or money into it, right? So gold heads are one of those where until you catch up, it seems like a very, very valuable resource because it is. And then once you catch up, you could actually spend very little to nothing in it and actually just kind of stay afloat. Okay, so let's cover the dynamic in this game real quick, right? I broke it down into like early, mid, and late game in the previous video. So the way I define early game now is pre-KVK1, KVK1, KVK2, right? And then KVK3, when you start getting access to end-game commanders, and then KVK4, when you're actually able to do crystal tech, but you're still fighting within your continent. I'll call that the mid-game. And then KVK5 and beyond is going to be the end game, okay? No matter how big of a spender you are, how well you save, when KVK3 opens up and you have access to some of these endgame commanders like Luce, Nevsky, Herman, Joan, you're going to be behind in gold heads, right? Because to actually, let's just say you're the biggest spender, you want to do 7 marches, you're just not going to be able to get like 6,000-7,000 or whatever it is, right? Like gold heads ready to go to just max all these commanders. So if you spend a little bit, it's very often, especially the bigger spenders, they spend some gold heads on some commanders like Richard, Charles Martel, whatever, and then they end up getting to KVK3, then they really regret it because it seems good until you get access to these end game commanders where their power creep level is pushed up so high that maybe at most you get to use them for 1 or 2 KVK during the mid game, but then by the end game they just kind of fade away and then you just never use them again, right? And then you're like, oh damn, I was really behind the gold heads. If I had the 690 to invest somewhere else, it would have been so great. So what's the strategy for this? All right, you either hoard all your gold heads starting out, or you are a bigger spender like mid spender or above, maybe putting gold heads into one commander so you can at least enjoy the early game to a degree until you get to the mid game, right? So the only 2 commanders really worth investing in right now before you get to KVK3 would be Alex and YSG, right? You can make a case at Minamoto, but that's just a spend, right? Like you don't have to spend gold heads on that. But Alex and YSG. So right now in the end game, Alex, in my opinion, is more relevant than YSG. Luce Alex, in my opinion, is still the best March in the game, right? But also Alex is in a very precarious situation because before Luce came around, he was dead in the water. He was getting phased out. He was at most part of the second best infantry March, right? But then somehow he pairs so well with Luce, he's part of the best infantry March now. But any other commander that comes out that clearly pairs better with Luce, Alex is cooked, right? Whereas YSG, you can actually get him earlier. Alex is KVK2, right? YSG is KVK1. The biggest reason why he's relevant is his 4th skill, where you just get a flat 50% more skill damage for any troop type, right? I'll talk about this in a future deep dive, kind of like the progression of how commander pairings work, what was focused on, what was important, and where we're at now, right? But because the current meta requires you to significantly boost the skill damage or smite damage, right, with normal damage increase, a universal commander like YSG with all the artifact KVKs around, and even with Archer, right, being able to boost skill damage, and then you have a triple relic. This could go up to 62.5%. He actually becomes really relevant. Doesn't mean he's the best, right? You can make a strong case that if you're doing top 2 Archer marches, you can not include YSG, but he's good enough where with the like the bastions out there, with the artifact KVKs out there, that he probably has more longevity than Alex, right? So can you skip both of them? Yes, right. But if you're going to invest in one, like right now, October of 2024, to pair in the end game, Alex would be more useful. But if you're thinking more like long-term, big picture, which one will probably survive longer, it will probably be YSG. Okay, so basically to summarize or sum up gold heads, right? You want to save in the beginning, or just spend at most on one, just so you can have some fun, but still save most of your gold heads. If you are going to actually be throwing quote unquote your money gems into gold heads, you really want to be doing it mid game, KVK 3, 4, maybe 5 and 6, depending on how long it takes you to catch up, right? Because that's when you're going to be the most behind, and you essentially want to get to a point with gold heads where you no longer have to spend on it anymore, with very little, and then you can just kind of come close to maxing. You're guaranteed to always max the latest and greatest commander that you need to, right? So that's gold heads. Let's actually get into equipment. Okay, so for equipment, right, the blacksmith here, you see to forge anything, right, there's a certain amount of mats I need. I just forged something, so I have no mats, right? But the ones that you ideally want, so they're in Navarre's control. There's a blueprint, and then there's mats. Okay, with the current system, because you can also awaken and refine, right? If you get really unlucky to actually get a equipment to awaken 5 and full crit, it could take you 9 blueprints, right? Because you need 1 to craft it, then you need another 4 to get from awaken 2 to 5, because awaken 1 is iconic crystal, and then you need 4. Let's see, and then you need 4 to refine, right? You could you refine once, it's 25, twice it's to 50, 3 times it's to 75, and then 4 times it'll be 100 if you get unlucky. Sometimes you could get a first craft crit, sometimes you could get a 75 and a 25, but regardless, you need blueprints, and also costs you half the material to upgrade this. I might have said it wrong. It's either 9 or 10 blueprints total that you need. Regardless, it's a lot of blueprints just for one actual piece of equipment, right? So the dynamic that creates is that this is actually the system that you're going to be perpetually working on. If you even look at the top players, right? Maybe they have a lot of awakened 5 crits, but I don't think I have yet seen one person running like just a full crit, full awakened 5 hit. Somewhere really close. But they're not there yet, just because like the blueprints start becoming a problem later on, right? It also gets really expensive with mats to do it, and then for the little bit of stat increase you're getting, for most people, definitely it's not worth it. Okay, so the dynamic for this is that when you start out, you're actually going to be short on mats, right? The materials that you need to craft all of this, and then as you get later and later on in the game, it's not quite as material intensive, even though it still is, but per material spent, you also need a lot more blueprints to keep upgrading, right? So if I just wanted to craft this greatest glory right now, right, I just need 1 blueprint and then 120 mats, right? But if I wanted to start awakening this, like the greatest glory, I don't know how, right? This only costs, it costs 35 mats, right? But I also need another blueprint with it to get to awaken 3. I think it's, I don't know, it's 20, 15, something like that to get to awaken 2. Right, so it costs a lot less to awaken every level, but you also need another blueprint with it, right? So starting out, I think most people, if they do are at least a little mid-spender, they hear a lot of people say the egg event is the best event. The egg event is mostly a more of a blueprint event than a mats event, whereas like something that comes out every 2 weeks, on Monday a reset, is like the Esmeralda's prayer and the Daruks, right? And a lot of people have said that's not good value, and like that's I guess kind of true, because like in the VIP shop, if you can actually get if you can get to a VIP level where you could buy these epic and blue chests every week, right? That value is slightly better than the Daruks and the Esmeraldas. But the problem with the mats is there's just not a lot of other ways to get them consistently besides those two events. Whereas like when you are focusing on mats, even though it's a little bit worse value than the VIP shop, because you should probably still go for it, because when you start getting into stuff like geared up here, the value here is even worse, right? If you're doing geared up for mats, right, at the $100 tier, basically when you drop a gold chest, you're only getting 4 legendary mats out of it for $100, right? And like it's actually kind of crazy to think about it that way. The way to go to get mats, I think, consistently is still actually the Esmeralda's, Prayer, and Daruks, even though the value is a little bit worse in the VIP shop. Now, as your equipment gets later on, right? So let's actually go to my equipment. So if you look at, let's just say, the Lucia Alex, right? This one right here, the Infantry March. A lot of these are Awakened 2 and 3, right? I'm actually starting, if I wanted to upgrade this further, which I'm not, I would actually start trying to crit this when I get there. But what I want to upgrade these further, I actually don't need as many materials, and I need a lot more blueprints. So I'm going to start being blueprint starved, right? So just think like when you watch a guy, someone says, say for example, the egg event is a really good value. It's a very good value for you if you're further along in your equipment and that's what you need. But earlier on, people actually just really need mats to catch up. Okay, so how does that kind of fit into the system? Kind of like what I talked about with the gold heads. It's something where when you start out, right, if you think there's gold heads and then there's mats and blueprints, right, you should save or spend towards mats and blueprints, because that's something you're going to be perpetually working on. And then even if the commander changes out, even if they introduce some new system, it's pretty clear at this point that Lilith is not just going to make the investment you spend into equipment go away, right? Because when a commander gets replaced, you don't get the gold head back, right? And we'll talk about armament next. But like if you get a better inscription, like the transmutation stones you put into a worse inscription to get triple stats, you don't get that back. But whatever you put into equipment, it's always going to progress you a little bit further, and you always kind of have that. Now that doesn't mean there's not going to be inflation, right? So inflation just means, like for example, more recently, within the last 6 months or so, Lilith has made it a lot easier to get more blueprints because of the Awaken system, right? So before in KBK, right, you can only get like at most like what 2 or 3 of these coins to buy these like KBK weapons and equipment, and you can actually only get 1, right? They made it where you could get 2 now, and then you can get a lot more of these coins to get a lot more, right? So they actually inflated or devalued how important blueprints are so you could get more, but you still don't actually lose it, right? If you crafted a Hydra's Blast, you're going to have that Hydra's Blast, even if they made it a little bit easier for people after you to get it. It's just part of the game. Okay, so if you were going to work on your equipment, I would say early game, right, before KVK 3, that probably is where your focus should be on. And it should start out being mats. And then, you should have an abundance of blueprints while you're focusing on mats. And then as you're starting to transition to the late game, your equipment's at a certain level, you're going to notice that like you'll put more value, you'll get more value out of like the egg event and other events that just give you a lot of blueprints. Okay, but like whenever you're in doubt, you're not sure what to work on your equipment, because that's something that takes the longest to max. And honestly, I don't think most people should max it. Depending on, I'm gonna talk to this audience like most people are here for open fielding, right? Just because again, this is probably a deeper video, but like unless at this point in this game, unless you're like a very, very high spend, you have to sacrifice a lot to actually do rally garrison. So I'm going to talk to people like they're doing open fielding, right? The better way to go, in my opinion, is to just set up your equipment so you can maximize your open fielding, right? So no matter how many marches you're running, right, 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 7, I think it's important that no matter how many marches you have, you at least have one set of equipment that's your best set, right? So you can use it, you know, quote unquote, if you want a cheeseburger, when you're out of troops, out of resources, out of speeds, and you just want to be as efficient as possible. And then you kind of have, if you can, 3 sets of equipment that are better than the rest, like 1 infantry, 1 archer, 1 cav. So let's just say you're running low on troops, right? But you still have some of each. You can still at least do pretty well, and then you have the rest, right? But for open fielding in general, you want your equipment to be a little bit more balanced as opposed to specializing in one thing, just because what you're really counting on is you're bringing, you know, all your marches on the field and then having them work together to produce an output for you, right? So the general, and there's some more specific guides made about this, but the general progression you want to think is, okay, you want to craft your legendary in the right spots, right? You can see right now I'm way ahead on equipment than iconic crystals. Like almost my whole siege set is missing an iconic crystal. I'm missing a leadership here. The reason why I still have all these epics is just because without an iconic crystal, these epics are, in my opinion, almost as good, and in some cases better than the legendary counterpart without an iconic crystal, right? So yes, does all legendary look better? Yes, but am I actually getting the most value out of it if I upgrade it now? In some cases, I'm actually straight up downgrading, or even if I upgrade, the amount of stats I'm gaining from material and blueprint spent is just not worth it. So that's just kind of where I'm at right now. I just need more KVKs to get more iconic crystals. Right, but in general, what you want is you want to get your equipment to awaken 2, right? So once they're all awakened 2, and if they're not crit, you didn't get lucky on a natural crit, then you actually start critting it before you go past that, right? Like you can see right here, there's a glaring. My Hulk Cloak, I got to awaken 3. Awaken 3 is literally like you get true capacity. Like the amount of blueprints and mats I spent on that to get to awaken 3, it's just not worth it. But that was also when I was stuck in like a 4-month off season, and I was so bored, and I just wanted to upgrade something, so I didn't feel like I was going crazy. So I knew what I was doing, but I did it anyways, and that's why I had the Awaken 3. But in general, you don't want to do that. Okay, so kind of to put a bow on this, to sum this up, so this is something that you should always be working on, right? Besides the times when I tell you should be focusing on gold heads or focusing on armaments, right? And when you're focusing on gold heads, really what I'm talking about is you're just maxing the wheel, right? Like you put everything towards maxing the wheel, because then for that specific commander, you could progress it a lot faster. So you're not actually accumulating that much gold heads. It's just that you're not using gold heads on progressing a commander. And that's when you're working on the commander. Okay, but for this, starting out, it's going to be a lot more mats heavy. Later on, it's going to be a lot more blueprint heavy. But this is something that you're always going to be working on. And at a certain point, you just have to pick, right? Like if everything is Awaken 4 and crit, right? Is it worth it to actually stay there and get everything to Awaken 5? Or can those resources actually be diverted to balance out the rest of your equipment a lot more, so that as a cohesive unit, when you're running however many marches you're running, they perform better overall, even though maybe the one set isn't like a super set. I don't think anybody, unless you're a rally garrison, should be trying to get something to Awaken 5 crit before you move on. It's just not practical, and you're actually losing out on a lot of open field productivity by going that route. All right. Finally, let's go to armaments. We'll stay here. So armaments are introduced during the off season, right before KVK 2 starts, right? So you don't actually even get access to that pre-KVK and then KVK 1, right? But once armaments are available, armaments are also kind of tricky because it's actually the only one where it's more luck based. Now, anything that's luck based, right? If you have more shots at getting lucky, you're going to get lucky more often, right? But it's not something where it's like a linear progression where if you put in X amount of gems or you put in X amount of money, you're guaranteed to get this, right? It's just that probability wise, you're more likely. So there's some really, really lucky people that put very little into it and haven't gotten really good inscriptions. And there's other people that put a lot more into it and haven't gotten that good of an inscription. It's kind of random, but at the same time, right? If you put more effort into it, or you put more gems into it, or spend into it, you do have a higher chance to get lucky. So armaments, the current iteration of it, right? So it's again October 2024. Something could change that could just completely wipe out what I'm saying. Right now, the best time to invest in armaments is actually when they first become available, because when you don't have any armaments and you spend a little on it, right? And really for armaments, there's not a lot of places to spend gems, and the places where there are to spend gems, it's not that great for a lot of it. It's just not worth it, right? It's something you literally need to spend money on, right? So if you actually have, if you are a spender and you're looking to spend on armaments, the best time to do it is when you first get access to armaments, because when you don't have anything there is pretty good. And really what you want to focus on, if you look at the bottom here, is that every slot, actually let's get the game, every slot has at least an inscription. Okay, you want to make sure every slot has an inscription first, and it's a decent inscription. So for example, if we go into the codex, okay, and let's go to something that people are more familiar with. Okay, so some are just a lot better than others, right? So Loosed, right, because, you know, I don't know why it's even in here, but if you're running Wedge with Loosed and you take 1% less normal damage of all types, that's not that good. So if you get inscription there, great, you know, keep it if you don't have something better, but don't use any transmutation stones on it, because once you get a better inscription, it could just be, say for example, a robust, right, where you get 3.5% health. All of a sudden, anything you put into the loose is just going to go to waste, because you're just going to recycle that, right? Where worse yet, you just kind of keep it on the side. It's this useless formation. I mean, a pretty crappy inscription that you actually invested transmutation stones into, but you don't even recycle because it hurts, because you wasted transmutation stones. Like it's just not worth it, right? So, for example, robust, breaker are probably the two best ones. Some of the other ones I like a lot are like strategic. Let's see if I can find it. Or assertive, right? You just deal 2% more damage while on the map. That's really, really good. In some cases, I would actually make an argument that assertive is better than some of the rare inscriptions out there, right? But in general, for armaments, you want to spend, if you are going to spend on it, when you first get access to them, right before KVK2 starts. And then from there, once you have at least a good regular inscription in every slot, what you're really waiting for is a good double inscription. So for example, let's go to my Lucia. I think I have a good double, right? But this one is actually a pretty good double. So Assertive, I just talked about earlier, is one of the best regular. And then on top of that, you get Spike, which, you know, you get 3.5% more attack. Do I wish it was like Robust or something? Sure. But this is actually a pretty good double, right? So to upgrade over these double, like the rare inscription is not going to be better than this. I literally need to get a special inscription, right? So something like this, if I'm a little bit further ahead in transmutation stones, I'm going to be willing to reroll this. But if it's not something like this, even though the stats could be ugly, I don't want to use my transmutation stones on it, because let's just say this was spiked only, 3.5% attack, right? If I use my transmutation stones on it, it's very easy that a better inscription could come along, or I get a good double or a good rare that's an upgrade over this, and then I'm essentially going to be recycling this or just putting this to the side, and I have wasted the transmutation stones. Okay, so if you are spend when armaments first become available. What you're shooting for is at least a decent regular inscription. If you could get a rare, a double, or even better yet, a special, then you could spend a lot more of the transmutation stones in it, right? But really, I've been fairly unlucky with armaments, right? Like this Intrepid is from a pity, so that means I literally got 10 rares on Wedge before I got it. Balance was from getting the 8 shards, right? Like this is all just like just from all the spent, not because I got lucky. You know, have you noticed I don't have a hunter? I actually have not won a KVK to get an Autarch since it's been released, right? So hopefully this KVK will break that streak. But what you're actually looking for is probably something like this, where you have, you know, like my second calf set, you have a decent regular inscription in each slot. And if you have a little bit more of the resources, like transmutation stones, you can reroll this. If not, just have the rainbow stats and leave this here until you actually get a inscription that's worth rerolling on if you're a little bit more short. Okay, this is something where uh, it's very easy to get to about this point, right? Basically 4 decent regular inscriptions and with fairly clean or really clean stats. But then to get much better, you one have to get lucky, but then the amount of spend you have to do to eventually pull like a balance or like an intrepid, right? Like either from the pity system or you know, the easiest way is to get it from the autarch. Uh, Besides getting it from the autarch, pulling it the other ways just takes a lot longer, right? So I think for most people, they probably shouldn't inspire to shoot for getting multiple specials besides just the one you get from the autarch. They should be shooting for getting 4 decent inscriptions, right, in every slot first, and then from there kind of working up. Now, you guys probably have already noticed, right? If you have 7 sets, it takes so much more because not only do you have to work on the armaments, you have to work on the equipment, you have to work on the commanders, right? So a way to kind of modulate this is determining how many marches you're going to run. If you're running 1 march and you only have to worry about 1 set of equipment, armament, and then like just 2 commanders, it's very easy to get one to a good place and then move on to the next, right? So like a lot of that depends on you. A lot of times people ask me, how many marches should I run? This spend. I mean, it also depends on your activity level, like your personality, like what you would like. It just, like some people just like trading more efficient, even though I could make an argument that the output isn't as strong, right? But like the way to kind of modulate whether you're going to make it harder for yourself to catch up on the armaments, gold heads, and equipment or not, it's just how many marches you're going to run, right? So general rule of thumb for this is you should be able to sustain when it comes to resources and speeds, right? Healing speeds, however marches you're going to run, right? Like if you can do that, then you want to get one commander pairing to a good place. That means armaments, equipment, and then the gold heads, obviously, right? Then you move on to the next one, okay? The other way to do it is kind of the way I decided to go, which I wouldn't recommend, is I actually went wide first, right? So I actually started out, I think I had 5 sets of equipment by like KVK 2 or 3, and then they weren't the best quality, but I had 5 sets. And I slowly try to like work on like this piece here on one set, then this piece here on another set. And it actually made it where some of those sets were essentially occupying a slot, but kind of unusable because the competition was better than what my equipment was for like a KVK, right? So I kind of lost a KVK with that. By KVK 4, with the competition level I was fighting at, I mostly caught up, and obviously by KVK 5, I was more than caught up. But in KVK 3, I just was not caught up. And like if I could go back, right, rather than having 5 sets, what if I just had 2 sets, but they were in a much better place? I would have had a much more enjoyable time and probably done a lot better, right? So just to summarize everything, right? When you're first starting out, focus on mats for the equipment, okay? Once you get to KVK 2, or right before KVK 2, if you are planning on spending on armaments, that's when you could get the most value out of it, because you don't have any armaments, so getting anything there will be a big win over other people that aren't spending, right? When you get to KVK 3, that's the time to actually start focusing your attention on the gold heads, right? So if you were saving early on, now like this is only the time where I would recommend like maxing the wheel or whatever you can do to put into the wheel for probably KVK 3, 4, and then like maybe even 5, until you catch up on commanders, and then your gold heads out at a point where you can kind of keep afloat and you don't have to spend that much on gold heads anymore, right? And then after that, as you get more towards the end game, right, you're going to notice that you're always going to be working on your equipment, but the focus is going to shift from being mat starved to actually being blueprint starved, right? And then as you get to the end, a lot of these armaments, right, it's just something you work on over time. You shouldn't actually shoot for just getting all specials in every slot, because to get there, the amount of money you have to spend is crazy, right? Whereas the more time you have, it will likely get closer to that, but really what you want to shoot for is at least just a decent inscription in every spot. So whenever I'm mentoring people where I see people show off their armaments, I always cringe a little bit when I see less than 4 armaments on their, or more inscriptions on their armaments, right? Because that means they somehow decided to choose triple stats over an inscription, which also means that they're missing out on some like potential upside there, right? So you ideally, every single one of your armament slots or commanders, they should have at least 4 inscriptions on there. That should actually be the first thing you're shooting for. And then for at least decent regular inscriptions, and then if they're at least decent, then you can start upgrading. If they're not, don't re-roll it. Just kind of keep it there, right? Or the triple stats until you have a inscription that's worth working on, and then that's where you can start re-rolling it. Okay, so if you watch all the way to the end, you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. And thank you guys for watching all the way to the end. I'll talk to you guys next time.